As Europe becomes more divided and an assertive Russia becomes more emboldened, the economic and security benefits that partner countries of the European Union expect seems more and more uncertain by the day. This is particularly the case for some Eastern and Central European countries such as Poland. To demonstrate these concerns, in September 2018, at a joint press conference with Polish President Andrzej Duda, Donald Trump said Poland is offering to pay Washington at least $2 billion to help meet the costs for a permanent US military base. As we enter a multipolar world where the global balance of power is distributed amongst multiple nations, particularly in the Eastern world, nations have become more and more concerned about their national security than ever before. This is the case in Poland, which has historically been occupied by both of its neighbours, Germany and Russia. I'm Kasim, this is KJ Vids, and in this video we will talk about the rise of Poland as a regional European power. Poland is situated in the North European plain, directly between Berlin and Moscow. Its location has made it inherently vulnerable to foreign powers and has historically been subjugated by a successive wave of invaders. In the early Middle Ages, Poland's small principalities and townships were subjugated by Germans, Balts and even the Mongols. By the mid-1500s, a united Poland became the largest state in Europe and perhaps the continent's most powerful nation. Yet 2.5 centuries later, during the partitions of Poland from 1772 to 1918, it disappeared and was parcelled out amongst the contending empires of Russia, Prussia and Austria. It was then restored as a nation in 1918, but ravaged by 2 world wars. Poland suffered tremendously throughout the course of the 20th century. World War II was particularly damaging, as Poland's historically strong Jewish population was almost wholly annihilated in the Holocaust. Millions of non-Jewish Poles also died, victims of more partition and conquest. Between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, Poland was sovereign for roughly 2 decades. It lost its sovereignty to Germany in 1939, and then its statehood was formalized in 1945. But then with the fall of the Third Reich, Poland effectively lost its independence once again, becoming a communist satellite state of the Soviet Union. It only regained sovereignty 50 years later after the Soviet occupation ended. The fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989 presented Poland with a new chance to be an independent actor in Europe. After more than 50 years of communist rule, Poland experienced a so-called Velvet Revolution, which refers to Czechoslovakia's end to the one-party government of the Communist Party. In a similar way, the end of the USSR marked a new beginning for Poland, who launched an aggressive reconstruction of its political structure, institutional framework and economic and developmental structure. In 1990, the Polish government made some hard choices to attract foreign investment and aid. It built up its foreign reserves, eliminated price controls, increased interest rates and ended subsidies that propped up unprofitable companies. This resulted in an almost immediate 40% drop in real wages. Poland focused on exports to grow its economy, using its low-paid but highly educated workforce to become indispensable to Germany's supply chain. In 1991, exports accounted for 1/4 of Poland's GDP. By 2017, they accounted for more than half. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Polish economy has doubled in size in GDP, and its GDP per capita has moved from 32 to 60% of the Western European average. Every single year since it has been an independent nation, it has had annual GDP growth. Poland was the only EU country to avoid recession because of the global financial crisis, and is today the 8th largest EU economy. The deputy head of the Polish Economic Institute said that in 2020 our country will overtake Portugal in terms of GDP per capita and will be on its way to having a GDP per inhabitant higher than Italy. Experts have also predicted Poland could step into the space left behind Britain when it leaves the EU. Without the UK, Germany and France will be missing a partner. This is an opportunity for Warsaw, but it will need more soft power and even faster economic growth. By the turn of the 21st century, Poland was a market-based democracy, abundant in products of all kinds, and a member of both NATO and the European Union. It was allied more strongly with Western Europe than with Eastern Europe, but as always squarely between them. As Russia continues to bolster its military capacities along its western borders, Poland are responding to their rising security concerns by adapting and expanding their defence capabilities. Poland and Russia have both a shared and strained history together. Both nations are Slavic, they speak similar languages and have lived in relatively the same way throughout their history. Over various periods of history, both Poland and Russia have conquered each other's territory. Despite all the similarities, however, there are sharp contrasts. Poles are Roman Catholics and therefore use the Latin alphabet in their script, as well as being a very Western-orientated country. Russians are of the Orthodox religion, which has centuries-long hatred of Roman Catholicism, and therefore write using the Cyrillic alphabet. The centuries of conquering each other, as well as totally opposite ways of thinking, have left a long mark of distrust between the people of these two countries. This, coupled with the cultural memory of Poland's partition at the end of the 18th century and the more recent forced membership of the Soviet bloc, leaves Poland insecure as to its territorial integrity. It is not surprising, therefore, that successive Polish governments have been so ever forward in their bid to make Poland a central NATO and European actor. Polish membership of both NATO and the European Union were from the offset primary policy goals during the 1990s. These were achieved in 1999 and 2004 respectively. As part of NATO, Poland has taken part in the Afghanistan mission and to secure its status as a dependable ally of the USA, NATO's paramount power. But Poland is also distrustful of its Western European allies in the NATO relationship. Traditionally, this has been because of what's seen as the double Western betrayals of the Second Polish Republic by the Allied powers during World War II. First, the failure to come to the aid of Poland in 1939, then the concessions made to the Soviet Union in 1944 and 1945. The fear of a similar betrayal in the face of a Russian incident worries the Polish government. The weak response by major EU military powers such as Germany and France to the Ukrainian crisis, as well as the reluctance of these two countries to meet the 2% NATO defence spending requirement, paints them as unreliable allies in the eyes of Polish strategists. In this context, Poland has moved to ramp up its own security and approach their old friend, the United States. During the Cold War, the Polish military was a large conscript-based organisation designed to conduct defensive operations of a conventional manner. In 1989, the new Polish state inherited a huge organisation that was technologically outdated and tactically inefficient for the role in which Poland was to find itself as a member of NATO. Since that time, much has been done to re-equip and retrain the Polish military. Poland is one of the few countries on the old continent that never cut its defence spending by a large margin after the collapse of the Soviet Union, keeping it at an average of around 1.9% of its GDP for the past 2 decades. During the 2008 global financial crisis, Poland's military spending dipped to 1.7% of GDP, but following Russia's incursion into Ukraine in 2014, it rapidly rebounded to a respectable 2.2% of GDP in 2015. Active duty strength has jumped from 100,000 to 130,000 personnel over the last 3 years, with an aim of 200,000 soldiers by 2025. New weaponry is being purchased in all categories: armour, artillery, aviation and air defence. Most importantly, including a recent $4.75 billion deal to purchase Patriot missiles from Raytheon. Last year saw the creation of the Territorial Defence Force, a part-time force equivalent to the US National Guard, with 17 light infantry brigades spread across each Polish province to deter Russian troops. And most recently, in September 2018, Poland's Defence Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced that Warsaw will add a 4th division, which is a significant enhancement to deterrence on the Atlantic Alliance's eastern frontier. This 4th division will be headquartered in Siedlce, in Poland's northwest, but it will eventually move closer to the country's vulnerable east. One of the anomalies facing the Polish military is that because of legacy bases from the Cold War, when Moscow-controlled communists ruled in Warsaw and NATO was the enemy, the lion's share of Poland's military assets can be found in the west, on the wrong side of the country from where the perceived threat is now. That is slowly changing as Warsaw repositions its military to face a resurgent Russia. Although Poland is becoming more assertive, investing as much as it can in its military, and is no longer subjugated as it was in its dark 20th century history, it is unlikely to regain its height as it did in Poland's 16th century Golden Age Europe, anytime in the near future. And even as it becomes a stronger regional economic and military power, it would be unable to operate outside of a NATO coalition setting. With a resurgent Russia and little trust and confidence in its European allies, Poland will continue to feel insecure and continue to take steps in order to bolster its defence. Part of this has meant requesting more help from its close alliance with the United States, with whom it has had a strong relationship for almost 100 years. Poland is one of the most consistently pro-American nations in Europe and the world, with 79% of Poles viewing the US favourably in 2002 and 67% in 2013. In this context, it isn't a surprise that Poland is desperate for the United States to build a permanent military base in Poland and offering to pay billions of dollars towards it. If this happens, it will signal a major provocation to Russia and create more friction in European power politics. We are heading towards uncertain times, and Poland will play its role in this uncertain world as it has unforgettably since World War II. Thanks for watching and see you next time.